So the chapter 6 is about the skin, but it is labeled the integumentary system. Integumentary system, mainly because it's not just skin; it's hair and nails are included in that, and so that's why they call it the integumentary system. So if you hear that, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about that whole in general. The book tells us the skin is the largest organ, which is kind of crazy. Covers 17 to 20 square feet. That's a lot. But that's mostly, again, our skin's big job. Anybody, what would be our skin's big job for us as people? Protection, yeah. Just keep us protected from the outside world, from bacteria, from other things that want to infect us, injuries, stuff like that. So if you hear integumentary system, that is the skin. And really right there at the bottom of that first page, I think it's page 89 or 88, but it's got kind of this image right here. And so it also calls the skin, we just looked at some membranes. The other name for the skin is known as the cutaneous membrane. Like I said, I kind of remember cutaneous membrane like cuticles or something, kind of helps me put it together that we're talking about the skin. So let me just mark something out so you don't get confused, okay? They're showing some layers of our skin. We're going to talk about it, but this guy right here for right now, that is not skin, okay? This is not skin right now. We're going to get there. Hold on. Stay with me. So our skin, our cutaneous membrane is just these two layers. The outer layer is called the epidermis. Epidermis. I say it all like one word, not epidermis, but epidermis. Epidermis. And you'll see this prefix some too. This is a more rare, like a very Latin prefix, but epi is usually, this EPI, epi, is usually like outside or outer. And I'm just highlighting, again, I try to highlight some, medical terminology prefixes of some of these words. So if you see them again, because we're going to talk about layers of something like our blood vessels, we have layers of the heart. We have different layers of all of our organs that we'll touch on this class, and a lot of them are called epi something or another. Epi this, epi this. The outer layer of our heart, epicardium. There's like continues on and on. So epi usually means like outside or outer layer, that sort of stuff. So epidermis is the most outside layer of our skin, okay? This is all that squamous, all that stratified squamous epithelium, stratified layers. It's hard to see, but it's just basically layers upon cells. And bad news for you, usually that last layer is pretty much mostly dead skin cells, okay? Mostly it's dead. They've already started to die off. And so our skin, our epidermis is rapidly just repeating, rapidly developing, rapidly mitosis, rapidly replicating itself all the time. Our skin has to always kind of, and I think the book might say, I forget where it's, I've heard this before, but it's something like every several years. I forget what it is, 3 or 4 years or something like that, or maybe it's sooner than that. We have like a whole new set of skin. Like the cell that started at the bottom of this stratified epithelium gets to the top and dies, and now we have a whole new, so we have like all new skin within like, so like we're like snakes shedding their skin. Not really, but I mean, it's like several years. I mean, we don't have this, huh? Is it 7? I think it's 7, yeah. It's like 7 years, whatever it is. It's irrelevant. It's not a fact you have to know. It's nuts to know, but it's interesting. So that's epidermis, outside. That's the layers of this stratified layer upon layer epithelium that's always kind of shedding and always replicating. And it protects us. Underneath that is known as the dermis, just the dermis. And so the dermis is just this whole layer here. That's your dermis. The dermis is known as is a deeper inner layer. This is connective tissue. So the outside epidermis is epithelial tissue, those multiple layers, epithelial, I don't know, whatever. Dermis is connective. So this layer of the dermis is probably a lot of that areolar tissue, that rubbery, loose connective tissue. And you can see what's housed in there. There's a lot of glands. Some of our sweat glands are housed in there. There's blood vessels. There's nerves. Other structures. Some of the hair follicle stuff's in there, which we don't have to get into, but So our not epidermis. Our dermis is the innermost second layer of our skin, and that's what houses a lot of the vital stuff of our skin. Our nerves, our blood vessels, all those things that feed those. And of course, they'll touch the other layers of the skin, but that's where like most of the big components are. So it shows us like receptors, nerves, hair follicles, glands, blood vessels, all that good stuff. And so again, it connects to the epithelial layer, and again, they would call that layer that's at the very top of this dermis that connects to the epithelium as like the basement membrane, the membrane that kind of connects the two. Going back to that connective tissue discussion on epithelium, basement membrane would be like this what would be the word? Innermost layer of epithelium that attaches to the connective tissue and is always kind of replicating. It's like making new cells on top of each other, basically. It's like that basement membrane hangs out and is always producing fresh cells that just kind of eventually work their way to the top as the dead cells slough off and fall off on the top. And that's our skin. That's how it protects us. And then all the other things are going to happen after that, okay? And so let me unhighlight this. So that's your cutaneous membrane. Your skin is just those two layers. Epidermis, which is all our epithelial cells stacked on top of each other, and the connective tissue, which is probably mostly areolar tissue. Now, hypodermis, even though it has dermis in the name, is not skin. It is the layer beneath our skin, the layer beneath our cutaneous membrane, okay? Which is pretty much predominantly, mostly all connective tissue. Typically, it's going to be highlights of more areolar tissue and adipose tissue, fat tissue. We have fat tissue kind of everywhere. And so that kind of, again, having a layer of fat tissue underneath this, these two layers is mostly going to help us conserve heat, have a place to provide energy, that sort of stuff. So hypodermis is typically mostly connective tissue, adipose, plus some more areolar, okay? That's our hypodermis, but it would be wrong to say, like if I asked you, hey, what's the layers of our What's the layers of our cutaneous membrane? You would say epidermis and dermis. Hypodermis would not be considered part of our skin, which is also known as cutaneous membrane. Did you hear that point? Is that making sense? So you say, how many layers of skin do we have? We have two. We have what's known as the epidermis and the dermis. The hypodermis is just saying this is what's beneath it. What's beneath it is fat tissue and other connective tissues. It's not part of our skin. The book says that right there at the very top of that picture. The skin, also called cutaneous membrane, consists of two layers, epidermis and dermis. You see that at the very top of the picture? So just keep that in mind. Don't let that confuses people because of the way they've shown it. And also because that layer of connective tissue beneath it's called hypodermis. That's the big discussion there. Now we're going to do some jumping around. That's the big thing I wanted to know. Just the layers, okay, and what you find in them. The dermis houses most of the stuff that helps us skin be your skin, glands, sweat glands, other secretions, nerves, blood vessels to feed all the stuff, hair follicles. And this is just showing you again, you don't have to know these. This is the picture on page 90. It's just showing you what it looks like. See, it's kind of highlighting this basement membrane, these really cells that are always, splitting and producing. And then you can see this layer right here is mostly dead cells that have risen to the top, are older, start to die off, and they start to fall off. And again, a gross fact is that most dust consists of dead skin cells. Some dirt, but there's a lot of dead skin cells in there, which is gross. So skin colors talked about on 91. There's a couple highlights from this page. Again, I'm kind of jumping around. I'm trying to tell you exactly what you could possibly see on your test. I'm focusing in here. What makes skin color is actually just about melanocytes. Melanocytes are a cell that produces melanin. Melanin basically helps protect the nucleus from UV, from ultraviolet from sunlight, okay? So skin color really has nothing to do with anything besides how much melanin is in your cutaneous membrane. That's all it really is. And it goes back ancestrally to wherever, right, people's ancestors are from in the world, depending on how much sunlight they deal with, okay? So fair-skinned people come from regions where there's not as much sunlight, right? People with darker complexions, ancestors come from regions with more sunlight. Big deal, okay? So always, my joke with this is always, it's really funny to get all bent out of shape about skin color when it has nothing to do with anything except culture and how much melanin you have in your skin. Because depending on how much melanin I have, it depends on your skin color. And obviously genetics of your family and lineage. But that's all that makes your skin whatever color or distinction shade it is. So it just protects our skin from sunlight. That's all it is. That's it. And functions of the skin in general, what do you think? I've already said protection. Some of this stuff is talked about in the book. I won't highlight all these. I think the big ones, though, is obviously like these two go together. Like if we didn't have skin, we wouldn't have protection. We wouldn't have a barrier from the world around us. Wind, temperature, diseases, dust, dirt, sun. And that kind of ties in this thermoregulation. Has a lot to do with that hypodermis layer underneath it. Helps us regulate it. But again, it's like keeping us warm. We don't have fur like some other animals, but without skin, we'd have a lot less of ability to keep our temperature regulated. So the vitamin D production is not the end of the world, but there's a discussion there about vitamin D production. I'm not going to test you over vitamin D production at all, but if you want to read about it, it's talked about basically on Function of the Skin, page 92 talks about it, if you want to get there. It talks about the functions of the skin there where we're highlighting. It talks about vitamin D production. Vitamin D is a key component in a lot of stuff we make in our body. Helps with blood clot. It helps with a lot of stuff. Helps with red blood cell production. And so we need exposure to sunlight to kind of help with that. So basically, the summary of that is our skin is very useful, and you should touch grass every once in a while. Has anyone ever heard that joke before? That's like a joke for like gamers, right? To get out of the house and like touch some grass, get outside. So basically, long and the short is it is good for us to get outside and get some fresh sunlight and air every once in a while. But if I backtrack a bit, if you look at, anybody buy any Ruffles that didn't come out of the machine? Very nice of you.
I almost ate them. And I was like, why are they laying there? I guess the thing.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks, Crystal. Sorry, if you backtrack, I kind of skipped around a little bit. I didn't mean to. Skin color, that page again, 91. There's a chart at the bottom. I thought I had this as a slide, but apparently I messed up. Skin color at the bottom. Abnormal changes in skin color is the chart on the bottom of page 91. You guys see that? There's some important ones I think are worth highlighting there. Just because you're going to see them in the future, and I want you to hear them somewhere first. But just like any body system, if there's something wrong with it and we notice it symptom-wise, it can tell us a lot about what's going on. So I'll just start at the top in the book and work my way down. I swear I made this chart, but apparently I don't know what I did. So first one I will highlight. Some of these I'm not going to talk about, but I'm going to point to the ones that I think are the most relative to you in the future. There's a few of them. And these will be something, these are need to know for me because I will throw a couple of these at the test because these are going to come up when you start doing nursing assessments in first trimester, and I just want you to hear them and get tested on them early. So first one is cyanosis. That C word is cyanosis. And you notice they put kind of the color too. If you notice, they kind of put a color behind it to help you identify it in the book. So they put blue behind it. Cyanosis is a blue tint. It means I don't have enough oxygen. So if you guys didn't know this, let me just tell you, we haven't talked about blood yet, but your blood is never blue, okay? Your blood in your veins looks blue because it's lower oxygen, and the combination of the sunlight and your skin color is going to make it look blue. But if I poke you, it's going to bleed red, like all of them. But blood that has low oxygen looks blue, and so if we have a lot of blood in our body that we're overall low in oxygen levels, we're going to look a bluish tint. So what I usually tell people with that, Cyanosis is the term used for that. People can be this way if they're choking, if they are also lacking oxygen from a respiratory disease. So if you ever have a patient that lips are blue and they look like they're not breathing very well, you should start doing chest compressions. Okay, there you go. That's pretty simple. You can look that way a little bit if you're cold, because the blood, if we get really cold, like you get let a kid go swimming and it's kind of cold and they get all shivery and their lips look a little bluish. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily dying, but that means that blood is now shifted a little bit. Like their oxygenated blood is pushing and they're really trying to like shift that to vital organs because they're cold and their body's trying to counteract it. So that would still be deemed cyanosis, although I don't think the kiddo has a problem. You just need to put a towel on them and warm them up, right? Again, all of this stuff, just as a reference for symptoms of patients or symptoms in people, one thing does not equal one conclusion. It's a category that has to be all things, okay? I always tell people to treat the patient, not the symptom or the vital sign. You can't treat a number. You can't treat one thing. You have to treat the whole thing together, okay? If a patient's lips are slightly blue and they say they're cold and they don't seem like they're having any breathing trouble, it might be because they're cold, okay? But if they say they're having trouble breathing and their lips are blue, then that's a different story. You see the difference, right? So don't look at these as one-to-one, like one equals bad news all the time. So that's cyanosis. Jaundice. Who's heard of jaundice? Yeah. What is jaundice? Yellowing. Yeah, yellowing of the skin and actually of the eyes. So our eyes, our sclera are all white, right? All of us have the white. That will actually yellow in jaundice. So jaundice is a condition of yellowing of the skin, and usually the most notable, first time you really notice it on someone's going to be their eyes. If their eyes start to yellow, that's pretty severe and you'll notice it. But basically for now, you just link that to impaired liver function. Something's wrong with the liver. Now, why everything gets yellow, we'll talk about when we talk about the liver, so don't stress it. But jaundice is a term we talk about, that yellowing, and typically jaundice is always reserved for people that are having some kind of liver issue for whatever reason. We'll talk through reasons, but it has a lot to do with bile and staining the skin, but it's liver issues. Bronzing, albinoism, I'm skipping over. I don't think those are, most of us have heard of albinism, or, we know what that is. Erythema is that one down there that's like a pinkish color behind it. It's pronounced erythema. All that means is redness, but it's abnormal redness, okay? Again, if I do an Indian burn on my own arm, right, it's going to be red. You know the Indian burns where you go like this? Okay, I give them to my kids when they act up. Maybe I should start doing that. Give them noogies, Indian burns. I don't know. I don't know what works. Someone tell me. I don't know. Taking snacks away, threatening doesn't seem to work. Spanking doesn't seem to work. I'm going to start, I don't know what. Making them sleep outside. I'm not sure. It doesn't work. They're more scared of mom than they are of me. And I'm scared of her too. So that's fair. Yeah, she's louder and scarier than I am. I'm much more relaxed, we'll say. Moving on. They're not scared of me. They are. I've had to threaten the belt. I grew up in a family where I got whipped with a belt. I grew up in a family where my father had me cut out from a 2x12 a paddle, sand it down, and then he proceeded to whoop me with it after I got done making it for him. That's the kind of house I was raised in. Yeah. So, yeah. I made sure I sanded that bad boy. I didn't want no splinters. But, that's the old school kind of thing I grew up in. So, I grew up in a time, again, when your principal could paddle you. So, And I had some of those in elementary school for sure. I was a little heathen, so anyway. But all jokes aside. So, erythema is just redness, okay? It could be from a slap, an Indian burn. It could be from a pressure injury. Any kind of redness that's abnormal would be characterized as called erythema. And it just shows that blood flow has increased to that area. It's come up to the skin surface, so it looks more red. Sunburns would be called erythema. Again, it makes the point, embarrassment. Your cheeks get rosy red. That's technically erythema. But usually I would reserve that for abnormal redness, something with a wound, something with like that. And there is erythema that's normal. Like when I cut myself, it will get a little bit of red around the site because blood flow has increased to try and heal that scrape or whatever. So erythema is not necessarily always bad. It's just what you call that redness. You call it erythema. The other one I'd highlight is right below that. It's pallor. And I always remember pallor, P-A-L-L-O-R, as pale, pallor, pale. It means pale skin. That usually is always signifying decreased blood flow. Okay, so if someone, whatever their skin tone, it doesn't really matter. If you look at their feet and one foot is their normal skin tone, the other one's much more pale, that would make me worried that there's not enough blood flow to that foot, kind of thing. If someone is very anemic, meaning they're low blood counts, their skin color will look much more pale than normal, full of color and flush. So, and sometimes if someone comes into your facility and they're already very pale and they need blood or something, you'll notice that you'll be like night and day. You give them some blood and their blood counts come up and you'll be like, oh, you look like a person now, not like it's like a zombie from a music video or something, right? So it's very noticeable, that difference, once you see it. But that's pallor, pale. I think that's the big ones I'll highlight. Those are need to know for me. So you can kind of skip some stuff for now. Number 9, can't talk. Page 93, you can skip that. That's hair. I'm not doing hair. Nails, I'll mention like one thing on nails. So nails is on page 94. It talks about some differences in abnormal nail changes. Some of these correspond with the skin color changes, and you can see that. Cyanosis, what was that? Blue tint, right? That'd be a similar issue, maybe not enough oxygen. Pale nail beds, pallor, pale, signs of anemia. You see some of these correspond on that chart. But really the one I'll highlight that's a unique one that people don't remember or is hard one is at the very top, called clubbing. And no, not like going out to the club, and getting drinks. Clubbing. Okay, clubbing is an interesting one. So clubbing is where the nail actually does this weird, almost like bulbous, like bulbs out, basically. It's a sign of long-term lacking of oxygen. Not like I was choking and I started not being able to breathe. Not like that. Like I have a chronic lung disease, the COPDs. I've been a smoker, I have lung cancer, something in that realm. Sometimes certain heart conditions too, bad heart failure, stuff like this. Lacking oxygen, on oxygen deficiency, long-term, chronic, okay? At the very distal, remember distal, very tip, distal into my fingertips, the fingers will like enlarge and they kind of look like drumsticks almost. So like the fingertips kind of enlarge a little bit. This is a little bit exaggerated, obviously, but I'm trying to give you the idea. Like that, okay? And then typically the nail will kind of do this downward angle. It'll kind of do like, that'll happen, like this bulb, and then the nail will kind of like curve a little bit. That's maybe, it's hard to draw from this. But like you can imagine kind of this bulb, that's really weird, but whatever. You can kind of imagine this bulbous end, okay? This is called clubbing. Clubbing is a sign of oxygen deficiency for a long time. And you'll hear me joke in this class about the show House. It's one of my favorite medical shows. There's actually a lot of pretty accurate things in that show. Now, again, it's a show, so there's a lot of far-fetched stuff. But overall, if you look at some of the science of the random stuff they're doing in that show, there's a lot of stuff that has some scientific facts, and it's fun. But one of the times he diagnoses someone with a cardiac disease by looking at their fingernails. Didn't touch them. He says, you have clubbing, and that indicates this and that. And he was actually playing a joke on that person. He didn't have clubbing. He was just trying to get them out of their hair, which I love House more for that. But what his definition of clubbing and why it would happen was pretty on point. Chronic oxygen deficiency is going to cause basically the very distal end of nail beds to like grow ineffectively. It means that they're just basically not getting enough oxygen nutrients to grow effectively, and it causes them to like change shape over time. And this is like, again, chronic, not months or something or weeks or whatever. This is like years and years of a chronic lung disease, years and years of chronic heart failure or heart disease, something like that. That's what clubbing is. So clubbing is a really unique one. Again, your short definition would be long-term condition that causes oxygen deficiency, causing a bulbous enlargement of fingertips and a downward curve of the nail bed, I guess would be your best way to summarize it. Very interesting. That's the only one I'm highlighting as a need to know for me that you might see on your test, because clubbing, I think, is very unique, and it's mentioned in other places in your medical texts when we talk about, not for us, but when you talk about lung diseases in the future. And it's just one that, like, if you've already heard it with me and tested over it, then you might be like, oh, okay, I remember this. This is something about oxygen problems. Okay. So that's it with nails. Page 95 is talking about glands, mainly sweat glands and stuff like that. I'm really not going to spend too much time on, I'm not going to spend any time on this actually at all. I'm really not. I just don't. There's some stuff we're going to cut out. This is where I'm going to hang out for the rest of this, is on page 96 and 97. On that whole page, there's a giant life lesson in purple about burns that takes up the whole thing, and that's where we're going to end today. So burns. Most of us have heard about burns before. So basically, I just want you to hear burns and get the 3 different degrees down. When you get in the first trimester in med-surg, she's got a test that's dedicated just to burns because they get that complicated. So I want to give you just the basic anatomy of what the burns are and some understanding so that you have this down, so then you can start adding the more complicated, like, well, what treatment does this person need? That sort of stuff. So they break burns up into first, second, and third degree burns. Those are based on basically how deep the burn is. That's all it is. It's basically how deep into that integumentary system, into our cutaneous membrane, is the burn. And then there's going to be different systems or problems we can kind of associate with this, okay? So burns, first degree burn, they call it partial thickness. I just like the first, second, and third degree. I think that's the easiest way to remember this. But they do say partial thickness. Involves, first degree means it only involves the epidermis, which again was that outside layer, first layer of the skin that is just the epithelial tissues. There's going to be redness, maybe some swelling and pain. So things like now sunburn can actually be a further degree than this. Like if someone's ever had sunburns that blister and you got sun poisoning from it, I have. I'm an idiot. I'm pale skin and I'm dumb. I got burned so bad in my face that my whole face swelled till my eyes were almost swollen shut. That was a fun vacation. Probably should have gone to the hospital, but I didn't. It worked out. I couldn't see, but I wasn't driving, so it was fine. So anyway, I told you I'm an idiot. Epidermis only though. So don't hear me that only sunburns fall in this, but that's the book's example. It's saying that like a light sunburn, it's painful. There's a lot of redness in the erythema. It lasts a few days, a few weeks, and it settles away. That would be that first layer of the epidermis, that epidermis layer. That's a first degree burn. That would be like if you kind of barely nicked the stove or barely nicked it where it didn't really blister, it was just red and it hurt. You ran some cool water over it, you put some ice on it, and then you didn't really notice it, after that. That would be like a first degree. Does that make kind of sense a little bit? All right. So second degree involves epidermis and part of the dermis. So this means that we're getting past that first layer into the dermis now. So the key differences here is blisters for sure are going to be in. Now you're definitely going to have blisters. Severe pain. Those are kind of how I remember the difference between the two. What does that mean? Yes, burns, pain, hurt, right? Sunburns hurt. A small little burn from the stove is going to hurt for a little bit. This second degree burns are going to definitely blister. They're definitely going to hurt really, really bad. Extreme pain that takes like a few days to go away, okay? So this would be like if you really nailed the stove, okay? Like a kid that like puts their hand on the stove for like more than a split second. It's going to be probably something like that. Could be scarring from this, and there could be the wound itself might look red, white, or tan. What that's saying is that blister and all, it basically looks a little bit like pus because all the skin cells have just died instantaneously. And so all the debris of the dead skin cells and all that dead tissue just kind of rises to the top of the wound. And so they can be kind of nasty looking. But the key is like blisters, severe pain, and there might be some nasty like blistery redness and whiteness, tannish kind of coloring going on. That's second degree burns. And you don't necessarily have to be like treated in the hospital for these. You can keep them clean and keep them dressed like any other wound. It should be okay, but it depends on the significance of where in the body and how much was burned, that sort of stuff. But they can be pretty extensive. If you got burns, second degree burns on like your whole arm, that could be a hospitalization and some care, wound care and stuff like that. It just depends. but like one spot in your finger or your arm from a stove, it's going to hurt real bad. You probably could treat it at home. You may need to go to the doctor and have it checked out. It's that middle ground. It's like, it's going to hurt. It's going to have blisters. It's going to have drainage. It's going to be gross. The last one is what they call 3rd degree burn. Again, they call this full thickness, but I really just stick with 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree. They're really confusing because they call 1st degree partial thickness superficial. They call 2nd partial thickness deep, and then they call 3rd degree full thickness. So that's like an old school way. I think you're better off just going right 1st, 2nd, 3rd. I think that's an easier way to say them. So if 2nd degree involved the dermis and the epidermis, well, you can kind of guess where this is going, right? 3rd degree means it extends into subcutaneous layer. That's your hypodermis, right? The layer that's not in the skin anymore. We're into fat. I'm writing hypothermia for some reason. I don't know. Hypodermis. This means it's going into fat tissue and other connective tissues past those 2 layers of your skin. So this one's interesting. The key interesting thing with this is this line right here may not be painful initially. Now that's interesting. Why do you think it may not be painful initially? The nerves are housed in that dermis, so we are saying that that whole layer that houses nerves is probably burned off. Now don't hear what I'm not saying. I am not saying that 2nd and 3rd degree burns do not hurt, okay? That's not what we're saying. What they're saying is that you can notice this or detail because it's burned away the nerves. It's just talking about the anatomy. And it means that someone that has these burns, literally, if it's like one spot of 3rd degree burn, it just may look rough and they're going to have some pain, but then it dies off and they're like, what? Holy cow. What usually hurts for these people is when their skin is trying to regrow or they're trying to heal, is when they have the most pain. So don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying burns don't hurt. I'm just saying initially. That was the key word they're using, initially. People that have 3rd degree burns are going to have pain. White, black, or leathery. Black and leathery is a word I'll throw out to you now. You don't have to memorize it, but it's called eschar a lot of times. It's spelled like this. I promise that's how it's spelled. Eschar means that this is like dead tissue that's just there. Black, necrotic, completely dead tissue, almost like singed, like burn marks on your burger, okay? I know that's a gross analogy, but that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's dead. It's that tissue's done. It just needs to be off. So a lot of problems people have with this, if they have some of this black and leathery dead tissue, and people have to do what's called debridement. They have to get some of that tissue out of the way so healthy tissue can regrow. And a lot of times with 3rd degree, they're going to need like hospitalization, depending on how much was burned. They might need skin grafts to get some of the skin to regrow effectively. So it's very intense. And they have a lot of issues. This gets a little bit more into the weeds, so this is not a need to know, but this is a nice to know for your future when you have that test some burns. And first is that a lot of times remember that our skin helps us sweat, right? It helps us regulate our temperature. That also means it helps us regulate our fluid a lot. So when I lose layers of my skin entirely, depending on how much it is, I may have trouble regulating my body temperature and regulating fluid balance in my body because I've just burned off a lot of the ability to kind of regulate those things. The glands that produce sweat, a lot of the blood vessels in my skin get burned. So that's a big deal. And so that's the main thing I want you guys for your test is just the difference between those 3 layers. That's it. Or those 3 degrees of burn. 1st, 2nd, 3rd degree. Okay? 1st was like only the epidermis, some pain, some redness, can heal pretty quickly. Maybe sunburn or worse. 2nd degree was like burn from the stove. That's pretty good. It's going to blister. It might look tan. It's going to have severe pain. 3rd degree was maybe no pain initially, depending on how bad it is, very deep, and going to need probably hospitalization, skin grafts, going to need a lot of work to clean the wounds, to like do that sort of stuff. And so that's the big take home from chapter 6. The only other thing I'll highlight is just a nice to know for the future, nothing I'm testing you on, is at the very bottom, I don't have an image of that, but the very bottom of that page 96 that talks about these burns, you'll see something that's called the rules of 9. Do y'all see that at the bottom of that page? That's how they determine. You ever heard them say, oh, the person suffered a 30%, like 3rd degree burns on 40% of their body. Have you heard that sort of stuff before, like on TV or in the movies? Well, that's how they come up with those percentages, right? So basically what they're saying is that the front of my head, the back of my head, together, that's 4.5 and 4.5%. 4.5 plus 4.5 is 9. So my head is equal to a 9%. So it's like if I got blasted with something that was really hot in my face and I had second-degree burns all over my face, and that was it, I would have second-degree burns on 4.5%, of my body, so to speak. That's how they come up with those percentages, okay? By the rules of 9. Looking at each extremity, so like the front and back of each arm, 4.5%, 4.5%, 4.5%, 4. So that's what the rules of 9 comes in, okay? So again, that's nothing I'll test you on. I think that's too advanced for you guys, but I think it's nice to know for your future, because that's how you apply the burns to like that sort of stuff.